My name is John Deely. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in Inuit Galway, and today I'm going to be talking about the barrier identification framework for the implementation of blue-green infrastructure. So this is a paper we actually got recently published. Many of the ALICE team members had worked on it, and it's open source, so anyone out there can readily avail it right now. So what I'm going to do is just talk through some of the ideas behind the project and why we thought it was important for the ALICE project in particular. So first off, why are blue-green infrastructures used less often than the grey infrastructures? We know that blue-green infrastructures provide many more ecosystem services than traditional grey infrastructure. For instance, flooding. So removable flood barriers or walls will stop flooding, but the comparable BGIN solution, which would be restoration of floodplains, also provides many ecosystem services like water purification, land rehabilitation, and more biodiversity. It's also true that in some cases, BGINs are actually more cost effective, and we can see this in the literature. But despite all this, there's comparatively low rates of uptake of BGINs in comparison to grey infrastructure. So what we wanted to understand was what inhibits the development of BGINs. So to do this, we looked at the literature out there. So there's a wide range of literature on blue-green infrastructure and the barriers to blue-green infrastructure. It is so wide that it becomes quite difficult. To do this. Sorry? Sorry, I can't make out what you're saying.
Alguien de ellos está. Es que ahora, como él está compartiendo pantalla, no puedo entrar, ¿entiendes?
So just continue?
Sí, pero se lo podemos decir a él.
Sí, alguien está abriendo.
However, yeah, given the breadth of literature, it's difficult to discern all the potential barriers
Es
that
que está en
projects could
pantalla
face.
prioridades.
Sí,
So
y no
what we
podemos
did is we
decirle no a él.
undertook a literature review
¿Está abierto?
of the
No,
identified barriers.
ahora ya lo he mostrado, ¿ves?
So we used the key search terms blue infrastructure and green infrastructure, and these were combined with terms like barrier, obstacle, and challenge. And when we did this, we found 535 results. So that means that there was 535 papers that actually met this criteria. So after removing conference papers and papers that we couldn't get our hands on, which were very few, we were left with 383 abstracts to read. So we read them through thoroughly to try and find the ones that actually looked at barriers to blue-green infrastructure networks. So after that, we were left with 84 papers, and all 84 papers were read thoroughly, but we removed papers that were overly specific. So if they looked at just elements of management and the barriers to one particular type of management strategy, or some sort of construction element, and just looked at the one narrow issue, we removed them. So we're left with 40 papers that were deemed appropriate for our analysis. So out of these 40 papers, we came up with 56 different barriers. So within the literature, there's no specific terms used for many of these ideas. So we had to try and come up with terms to encapsulate the concepts and ideas within the literature. Yes, so we identified 56 different barriers. Yeah, but we felt that was quite unwieldy. It would be difficult for someone to try and go through all these barriers and assess whether or not they would impact BGIN program or project. So we went about categorizing them first of all. So we wanted to place them into one of 5 different categories. We found that the barriers themselves didn't easily fit into any of the categories, or didn't easily fit into just one category rather. So we used the rate of occurrence throughout the citations, throughout the 40 papers, and expert knowledge to discern which category each barrier should fall under. So the first category is institutional and governance. So institutional and governance, as it suggests, are got to do with legislation and problems within governing bodies. So quite often we found that the legislation was behind the technology. It was behind where the BGIN technology actually was. And in some cases, although not necessarily in European cases, some of the legislation was so outdated that it would prohibit the building of BGINs. For example, they could specify that a certain amount of concrete need to be used in a flood protection barrier. And at the time the legislation came in, this was important. It made the flood protection barrier much safer, but it doesn't apply to BGINs. So when you have that percentage need, it means that a BGIN can't be created, or particular BGINs can't be created. So the second group was sociocultural. So sociocultural means different things for different groups. So for residents, sociocultural could be around them undervaluing or not putting the proper weight on the ecosystem services that may be received from BGINs. Whereas for managerial groups, a big issue was technocratic path dependence. So technocratic path dependence is when individuals have a set method that they use within their organization. And they want to keep on using this method because they understand it. They know it works and they want to keep going with it. But this technocratic path dependence means that they won't break away and try these new BGINs. So they're stuck using the great infrastructure. So knowledge was actually one of the biggest problems. So there was a general lack of understanding and knowledge around BGINs, but not just around the ecosystem services and how they are built, but also on the comparable grey infrastructure. So how that may be detrimental to ecosystem services and how to compare the two. The fourth is one of the more obvious ones, so technical and biophysical. So this has got to do with the construction of BGINs. This could include retrofitting cities. So if you want to put on a rooftop garden on top of a building, the building structure has to be strong enough to take the rooftop garden. And if the building wasn't built with that in mind, it may be difficult to overcome that sort of barrier. Also, if you were to implement trees within a city, you have to consider underground wiring and piping and how the routing system could affect that. But on a more basic level, you might find that you don't have the land space to make the connectivity to go from a BGI to a BGIN, so networking of blue-green infrastructures. The final category was funding and markets. So funding and markets actually had the most cited barrier within all of the literature. So 26 of the 40 papers said getting funding from the BGINs was very difficult. So a lot of the funding that was out there was precluded from using BGINs. That became a major issue. We also find that there's very different effects of funding and markets on the different groups. So residents or users may be the taxpayers, whereas landowners may be the landowners, and they were trying to profit maximize, whereas the people who are paying taxes want to reduce their taxes. So you kind of had loggerheads to a certain degree within that category between the two groups. But once we categorized all the variables, we found that we could actually reduce them quite a lot. So this here is actually the framework itself. After we reduced from 56 down to 25 barriers. On the left-hand side is obviously the categories and the barriers, and on the right-hand side is what's called the threat level. So the user would fill out this framework, assigning a threat level to each of the barriers for their particular BGIN in a particular geographic level. So the threat levels go from none to high, and it might be useful here for them to compare different projects using these threat levels. So they could say, okay, one project has 5 medium level threats, whereas another project has 6, 7, 8 medium level threats, and they would take this into consideration along with cost benefit analysis and other types of analysis to compare BGINs and to compare across grey infrastructures. In application, one could either give the framework to an individual or to groups. In either instance, there needs to be a facilitator or someone to walk them through the framework itself. So the first thing the facilitator should do is begin with an introduction to BGINs. So most people don't understand what BGINs are. So this is vitally important when beginning talking about the framework and in general BGINs. The framework itself doesn't work on BGINs as a general topic. It works on particular BGINs. So a project has to be in mind, or projects, and particular geographic level areas, because the barriers will be specific to each BGIN. The framework is then applied, so they assess the barrier levels for each of the case studies, each of the particular BGINs that they're looking at, and there'll be discussion amongst people to seeing where they can try and figure out what is a barrier and how it can be reduced. Maybe someone has an idea of the barrier being quite high, but someone else has a solution which would reduce the effect of the barrier on the BGIN in they're thinking about. And then we can compare results across different BGINs, as I just discussed. So the benefits of the framework are first, and I think most importantly, an accessible means of presenting known barriers, so barriers that in the literature have affected other BGIN projects, and applying them to new projects or to managers who are unknowledgeable about these particular ideas. This will facilitate a discussion on what may be previously unknown and a discussion on the known barriers. It also gives you a systematic way of assessing the possible barriers that could affect a BGIN throughout its life cycle. And we can compare across different BGINs as well. Within the paper, which again is open source, so anyone can go out there and look at it right now, we have additional supports and information. So it allows those interested in particular barriers, and most people will be interested in particular barriers, not all 56 barriers, but they'll be able to go and see where it's been cited in the literature, where it occurs, what type of projects it occurs, what kind of geographic areas it occurs in, and get more information on how they can solve their particular barriers. So that's the framework, and that's been me. So thank you very much.
So hopefully everyone can see that. Good morning, everyone. Sorry for those technical issues. Yeah, my name's Stephen Hines. I'm from the National University of Ireland in Galway here. And there's a couple of people from the island of Ireland today. So on behalf of them, it's our national holiday here. So happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. Yeah, as Pepe said, I'm just going to talk here about some of the work we did in the ALICE project, looking across the case studies at residents' preferences and willingness to pay for blue-green network infrastructures. And this is an interesting area, you know, evaluation. It can provide an indication of blue-green infrastructure policy efficiency and economic trade-offs between alternative scenarios. So for example, in the case of maybe a flood reduction project, there's numerous options there, and a decision maker may be very interested to know, well, what are the costs and benefits of the alternative options. So that there might be an option of a grey infrastructure solution to the flood issue, or maybe there's a blue-green or nature-based solution. But the decision maker may be interested to know, well, what are the costs and benefits of each of those options. And often it's the case that on the cost side, it can be relatively straightforward to estimate the costs of putting in place maybe a flood prevention barrier or a seawall or whatever it might be. But and you can identify the benefits there. The benefits will be the same in either case. But in terms of the nature-based solution, it can be very difficult to estimate what the cost of that would be, but also on the benefit side, it's difficult because you often have what we refer to as non-market ecosystem service benefit values associated with that blue-green infrastructure option. And yet, in a cost-benefit analysis, you do want to take into account those extra additional ecosystem service benefits that you're getting. So if you, for example, restore maybe saltwater marsh or the habitats in a river, well, then you're getting all these additional ecosystem services, be they maybe improve water quality for recreation or improve biodiversity. And yet we often see that these benefit values are not included in the benefit cost analysis situation. So you may end up with a situation where maybe the grey infrastructure option looks like it has a higher benefit cost ratio, when in fact that isn't the case. The BGI solution is much offers a much better benefit cost ratio. So yeah, we looked at this issue in terms of the benefits from BGI solutions in some of the case studies. And they, in all cases, it indicated positive marginal societal willingness to pay for the services associated with the BGI projects. And this is just sort of a framework how we think about this. I mean, we heard yesterday from our colleagues on ALICE, you know, how they've been modeling the functions and processes associated with the ecosystems under investigation. So it's been great to be able to work with them, because working with the you know, marine biologists or you know, water the ecologists, biologists, whatever they might be. I think I work in the area of marine, so I think in marine a lot. But they were, by working with them, they set out along the ecosystem cascade, they set out what needs to be done in terms of what could happen if you put in place the BGI solution, in terms of how the ecosystem functions will change, how ecosystem services, the delivery of ecosystem services will change, and they paint that scenario. And then we can come in with our tools as economists and try, and we think in terms of benefits and values, and we use the toolkit there in the dash box to try and put some value on those benefits being delivered from these improved ecosystem services. So that's just the sort of framework we operate within. Then in terms of the case studies, we looked at 3 case studies in particular: the Carlingford Catchment, the Paciago in Cantabria in Spain, and the Coursno River watershed in France. Excuse me if I'm butchering the pronunciations there. And we use what's called stated preference approaches, where basically you're asking the residents within those catchments directly what their willingness to pay is. Now, there's a number of different types of stated preference approaches, but in the French case and the Northern Ireland case, we use what's called a discrete choice experiment, where we directly asked individuals, where we presented individuals with choice options associated with different management options, and showed, well, these are the ecosystem service benefits you're going to get under each of these alternatives. Which option do you prefer? And some of them would have of the options will have a price associated in terms of increased tax that would be required to put in place those options to achieve those ecosystem service benefit values. And you can just see, you know, the surveys we carried out in each of the catchments, they were nationally representative. You can see the sample size there at the bottom, ranging from 320 respondents to the survey in the French case to over 1,000 in the Spanish case study. Just to go through them very briefly, this was the Carlingford Lock case study, where we carried out a discrete choice experiment to explore the willingness to pay of the residents in the Carlingford Lock catchment. And you can see this is an example here on the right hand side, as you're looking at it there, of what we call a choice card. So each respondent would have been given a number of these choice cards, and then they would have been asked to look at the attributes involved here, and the management aspects there are habitat protection, maintenance of water quality for recreational opportunities, and management of banks or shoreline for prevention of flooding events through natural solutions. Now, what we did in this case, we wanted to see did the public have any preference in terms of grey versus nature-based solutions. So we split the sample, and we asked half the sample. We indicated to half the sample that the flooding would be solved using a nature-based solution, and we gave them details about that. And then the other half, we told them it's going to be solved using grey infrastructure. Now, in terms of what would be achieved, the flood prevention would be the same in either case, but we just want to see, was there any preference of one over the other within the choice experiment. So just some findings here in terms of the Carlingford survey and the discrete choice experiment. The environmental quality in the catchment was rated as fairly good to very good by 67% of the respondents. The management of the catchment was rated as fairly good to very good by 64%, similar value. However, when asked about future changes, you can see there to the natural resources and wildlife of the catchment and how it affected them, only 3% said it would have a major effect on them, and 26% said that it would have some effect. So they were presented with these Likert style questions and asked to respond. Most beneficial services they were given a list of ecosystem service values associated with the catchment, and the most beneficial to them were science value, which was a bit surprising, recreational value, and tourism value, in that order. And other questions: biggest threats to the natural environment was seen as plastic and litter. Industrial pollution was ranked second, and temperature change was ranked third. And they could pick multiple options, so that's why that doesn't add up to 100%. They were picking multiple options in terms of what they thought were the key threats. Yeah, and the average respondent used the catchment for recreation 28 times a year. And just in terms of the results from what we estimate from these types of stated preference approaches, we estimate what's the welfare impact, what is the marginal willingness to pay for the different attributes involved in the management. And you can see there that the value associated with the water quality for recreational pursuits, that had the highest value to respondents, at £33 sterling, 33.77. And what was interesting here, the BGI solution, it was interesting that the BGI within the model, we interacted with the status quo option alternative, where basically there's no change in the management. And people were far less likely to choose the status quo option when they were in the BGI split. So that what that means is that basically those individuals are more likely or more willing to pay for an option, a nature-based solution to the flooding issue, if it was for the solving of the flooding issue if it was a BGI solution as opposed to a grey solution. So they were willing to pay €23 more. But it was interesting that we found that those living in the in a flood-prone area, they were willing to pay €34 for a reduction in flood risk to once every 25 years, if that's when the flood risk was only a chance of once every 25 years. But there was no, it wasn't statistically different. If someone lived in a flood area, or an area that was prone to flooding already, well, then that had no impact on their preference for a BGI versus a grey solution. Basically, they just wanted the issue solved, which was interesting. In terms of the Spanish case, we looked at the issue of land burning as a land management tool. Now these results are just we're still working on the data. It's relatively hot off the press, as is the results from the French case. But it was in this case what we were interested in. We wanted to know, well, do residents of this area, were they willing to pay a price premium on a beef, the beef that they buy, if it was sourced from I suppose farm that practiced controlled burning techniques, and that was the key question here. And I suppose that this is a way of paying for this ecosystem service of managing the landscape and protecting the habitat in these areas by not having uncontrolled burning. And again, just some of the results from this one that we're seeing at the moment: approximately 60% of the respondents eat meat 3 or more times a week in the in this region, 95% once a week or more. Taste was the factor viewed most important when deciding to buy beef, followed by it being locally farmed. Yeah, beef being produced in an environmentally friendly manner was deemed important or very important by 82% of the sample. And 70% of the respondents at the start of the survey were familiar with this idea of land burning and that was practiced. And it can, I mean, land burning is not necessarily a bad thing. It can actually prevent uncontrolled episodes of burning by burning in a controlled manner certain strips of land, and for regeneration of land as well. And again, in this case, the most significant threat to the natural environment of the region was seen to be from plastic as a garbage, and 88% said forest fires were a threat, and 83% said temperature change was important. Just in terms of willingness to pay here, they were presented, in this case, we used what's called a contingent valuation method, and they were presented with this alternative beef product. What was it? I guess Cadera beef steak, and they were said, okay, it's going to be labeled, it's going to be the no burn beef option, that there's no uncontrolled burning, it's guaranteed, it's not used. Would you be? They were asked, would you be willing to pay something, a price premium in this case, for that type of product above the usual beef you would buy on your weekly shop? And then if they said yes to that, then they were presented with a bid value, and were asked just one bid value, and that bid value was varied over respondents, and they said, okay, would you be willing to pay this amount? So we use what's called basically a selection model. We estimate then what is the mean willingness to pay for this no burn option, and it turned out that you can see there, it turned out to an average value of 24 euros 59, with a 95% confidence interval there between 22.78 and 28 euros 11. So again, these are just hot off the press, and this is my colleague here, Dennis Bailey, and his colleagues in the University of Brest. They've been carrying out a discrete choice experiment as well. So he sent me on some results that they're seeing at the moment, but they're just working on this as well at the moment. And they looked at this Corsno River watershed, and again, they carried out a discrete choice experiment in this area. And this is an interesting one, because there is recent legislation here that allows the local authorities to raise a local tax per inhabitant of the catchment, to manage the water bodies, but Dennis was telling me they're very reluctant to actually use this fiscal instrument, and when it is used, it's rarely above 5 euros per inhabitant. So it was interesting to see here, just to run a discrete choice experiment, where again, in this case, the attributes used are landscape quality, urbanization and artificialization, natural risks and the challenge of water supply, and the protection of aquatic and terrestrial biodiversity. So it was interesting to see here, again, there's some summary stats or some findings from the initial analysis of the data, and similar concerns raised across all these studies. We can see here, but what was interesting is actually when Dennis and his team calculate the willingness to pay to finance the water management option here, that it ranged, the respondents, they expressed a willingness to pay between 37 and 41 euros. So it would suggest that the reluctance, maybe the local authorities been too reluctant in terms of the use of that fiscal instrument, and that there is room to extract higher levels from the local inhabitants who do appear to be willing to support management of the watershed. So look at that's just a very quick run through of some of the results we're seeing here, but I just, this is evidence of the benefits of nature-based solutions or blue-green infrastructure is becoming much more important now, Particularly, we see it under, it's a restoration is now so important under the new EU Green Deal and the EU biodiversity strategy for 2030. So, and within those strategies and the Green Deal, they do highlight the importance of being able to demonstrate these benefit values from that type of restoration activity and from putting in place blue-green infrastructure. So I'll stop there, Pepe.
Thanks a lot, Stephen. Thanks a lot, Stephen, for the talk, and sorry for all the inconvenience. I think we fixed all the technical problems now. To all the stuff that we have, we added the little bit of problems of connections with Stephen, but I think we are now up and running. We accumulated a little bit of delay. We will just go through the coffee break to keep things on time. So our next speaker is Diane Burgess from the Institute from AFBI on Northern Ireland, and we will give you now. You can share your screen, Diane, and get into your talk.
Thanks, Pepe. Just actually doing. Unmuting myself and hopefully sharing my screen. So hopefully you can see my first slide here. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to talk. And also I'm talking on behalf of the AFBI team for ALICE. So reporting on a study which has been undertaken by David Bannon, Graham Finney and Rachel McCann. So it's very much a team effort, which I'm reporting here. And what we're doing here is looking at the opportunities for BGINs in the Carlingford Catchment. Are farmers or are the BGIN providers able and can they deliver the BGINs? So we've already heard from both John highlighting that there's barriers in developing BGINs and support for those BGINs from Stephen across the countries in ALICE. What we're looking at here is rather than the development of a BGIN structure, it's how will the potential BGIN providers respond to a scheme. And I'm going to present results from a survey of BGIN providers in the Carlingford Catchment. So just to give a very brief overview of the issues that are faced within the Carlingford Catchment and who our BGIN providers will be. The key environmental issues in the catchment are water quality, fire risk and flooding. And these were identified through our stakeholder workshops and then were reflected in the modelling output from the ALICE models. So just on that background, we have the situation without any BGINs on those maps. And these are just outputs from our stakeholder workshops where our stakeholders told us what was important. We listened. In response, we looked at what BGINs could actually be created to solve those environmental problems. So we're looking here at improving existing peatland, creating more woodland, creating water storage, creating riparian zones and wild bird cover. So to help biodiversity, to help water quality, to help water quantity, and to also reduce the fire risk. From the modelling and also from our stakeholder work, we've identified that there's different areas where different BGINs need to be located. So it's not just a case of where the BGIs are, whether it's some woodland, whether it's a riparian zone. It matters where they are in the catchment and also the scale to get people forming a network. It's not a one solution fits all. It very much depends on where you are in the catchment, what the problems are. To look at the catchment as a whole, and specifically looking at land use, the predominant land use in the catchment, as you can see in this map, is agriculture. And predominantly, there's a lot of small farms, which you can see hopefully in the distribution of those colours. There's a small area of urban area, I guess, which the arrow points to, and there's some other small areas around the catchment. And there's an area of state forestry which doesn't appear in this map, which is why I put an arrow to it. So effectively, our BGIN providers are farmers, and there's a lot of them. So to create a BGIN in Carlingford Catchment, we need to get many landowners involved, and they're small farms. So how do we get the individual farmers to create the BGIs or implement the BGIs, and how do we get them to form a network so we get a BGIN as opposed to a lot of individual BGIs within a catchment? It's the network in delivering the different ecosystem services. We've got a lot of research in the background going on of what drives farmer behaviour, why will they integrate or implement BGIs and into a network, and it's hinted at responsibilities. So rather than just doing a tick box exercise, it's I'm responsible, I'm getting results, I feel pride, I see myself as a custodian of the territory, therefore I get involved. And also in terms of group work, the Tweed Valley has shown the role of a trusted intermediary, linking different farmers together and creating a greater good. And we've got the example here of the Tweed Valley, which is one of our Alice success stories. We have a presentation on the Alice website highlighting what the Tweed Valley did. And we will shortly have the Alice success story video to be able to be released, which I've seen it recently and it looks really, really good. So there's lots of research looking at behavioural change, and are farmers going to accept these types of schemes? So this will hopefully help answer the question, will farmers join a PES, a Payments for Ecosystem Services scheme? And also, will they work together? So we did a survey across the Carlingford Catchment. Again, this is hot off the press, so relatively fresh results. And also, it's a qualitative interview, so a lot of data, so a lot of editing has gone on to create the information in this slide today. The key thing that we're looking at is attitudes of farmers. And within the catchment, we already have a payment for ecosystem schemes. Well, actually, we have two, because we've got the environmental farming scheme in Northern Ireland, and we've got the glass scheme in the Republic of Ireland. So these are agri-environmental schemes funded through the EU, at which point it's a voluntary scheme. Farmers can choose to sign up and to choose options that will help the environment, and then they get paid a sum of money for that, which is generally based on an income foregone basis. So we're looking at what attitudes do farmers have to these existing schemes. Are they joining up? Are they not joining up? And crucially, why? Because this will have an impact on future schemes, whether within the agri-environmental framework or out with, that will affect what people do or what farmers do. How likely are they to implement BGIs, and how likely are they to connect with their neighbours to deliver a BGIN? An individual farmer in the Carlingford Catchment can't create a BGIN because of the scale of the farm and the scale of the issues. It needs joined up thinking and behaviour by the farmers. We also look at relationship of the farmers with the environment and explore tentatively the potential of group working. So to support what Stephen is saying about the funding for environmental schemes, money, it always comes back to money. Environmental impact, yes, but how's it actually going to help my farm and my routine farm work? We need to be properly rewarded for it. So the farmers are reflecting what Stephen is saying, that money is important, provide funding, and BGINs will emerge. However, few issues here. Farmers are saying the payment you get is not huge. And also, if you're paid just to do something, it isn't as effective. You have to want to go and participate. So it's more than money. One farmer who was very proactive, engaged in a group scheme, which I'll come into later, and they've linked with the RSPB, which is a charity promoting wild birds. I'm trying to think, so protecting birds and enhancing biodiversity and birds across the UK. This farmer is really, really proud of the work that they're doing, but I want to tell people that we have the RSPB on the farm and they can see the yellow hammers in the plot of land that we've set aside. So it's pride, we're doing something, we're getting results. I want to tell people it's not just, I did something, got some money and walk on. It's, I'm making a difference. There's also issues that how does a scheme fit with the farm? The schemes must be short and sweet to apply. I might have considered it, but the biggest problem is machinery. So it's going to be difficult for that farm to respond. And also location, that the options are more limited on a lowland farm. And also in terms of targeting, the farmers are choosing to, strangely enough, to put the measures on unproductive land. So it is down to money. The environmental benefits are provided don't have a big impact. So they're taking small portions of land, aren't performing the best to put the measures on. Also, a good bit of negativity relating to the schemes. So I won't go near an agri-environmental scheme for barge pole. Farmers have got their fingers burnt in earlier schemes. So they're reluctant to become part of current schemes. Some of this is due to the lack of trust. Farmer explaining that he'd seen 2 cars in his yard with Department of Agriculture signs, and I think it's a police, and it's a fear mechanism. What have they done wrong? And they're not going to go into a scheme where they're under fear. They need to trust. And that's a two-way measure, that the scheme runners need to trust the farmers. They need to listen to what the farmers are saying. And also the scheme can be quite restrictive. So here they're talking about want to take a hedge for safety reasons, but we're not allowed to, even if we want to replace it with something that's actually better. They're restricted in what they can do. How do the farmers relate to the environment? Well, like the study in Italy, one of the farmers, I'm a custodian of the landscape. He's proud. Another farmer is getting satisfaction from the wildflower margins, and they're doing their bits. It can be good for everyone. And also they treat it, or some of them at least, treat it with respect. You have to look after things. It's up to us to treat it well. Farmers are working alongside nature, and if nature's not thriving, then their farm is suffering and your farm needs to be looked at. So there's a respect for that relationship between farmers and the land, which can be tapped into in terms of creating BGIs and BGINs. How do they relate, or how do they think the community relates to them? One farmer thinks that they're held in high esteem in the local area. They post on social media and get a fantastic reaction. And what they do in terms of the environmental measures is really appreciated. However, there's a lot of fear or negativity that they see the farmers being attacked by community. So one farmer is involved in the farmers union. All they get is roadblocks, bad press, an agenda. It's frustrating. Their past president of the farmers union was on a local radio show and was victimized about what they're doing to the soil, the air. And ironically, this was from a vegan who was saying how bad agriculture was. Yeah, this is a vegan who flies around the world and does various things and has huge carbon emissions. So it's looking at it from a point of view where they're under attack by people who aren't necessarily perfect themselves. So they're feeling victimized, they're attacked. How can we help them? The last stage was looking at how we can get the BGIN, the network aspect of it. Can we get farmers working together? And some of the farmers we asked were a bit negative and view farmers as being bad at cooperation, don't like people knowing their business. Others have got, there was a potential that we can learn from each other, and they personally would have no issue with working with other people, but would neighbouring farmers work together? Less certain, but it needs to be an attractive proposition. And again, depends who the people are and recognising the challenges. What did come out of the survey is people highlighting different groups that do exist of bringing farmers together. So you've got business development groups where it's very much looking at sharing the knowledge of farming, how to improve farming. And so the farmers here is highlighting that you have to discuss and open up and trust, where a different farmer has actually become involved in a group scheme under the agri-environmental scheme, which is run by the RSPB. And they're showing trust in their advisor and positivity that they're learning, they're sharing. The role of the RSPB advisor is very good, understands agriculture, makes sure they're doing the right things and making them save money. So in that respect, maybe the things like the group scheme there could be a way forward of how to get farmers into a scheme to deliver BGIs and how to get more farmers and get that cooperation needed to create a network. So just in summary, provision of payment is not sufficient to bring about the implementation of BGIs, let alone a BGIN. We need to look at targeting the actions, maybe a results-based scheme, reconsider or increase the payment rates for targeting. How can we get the right things in the right places rather than just on the poor agricultural land or the poorer, less productive land? We want to look at the benefits of in terms of ecosystem services. In terms of BGIs, where you're looking at an individual farm, trust is a biggie. The design, so it fits with the farm and targeting the areas. And to create a network, is there a role for an intermediary, whether that's the business development groups or the RSPB within a group scheme, or is it something separate? And again, trust both of the farmers with that intermediary and also with each other. And then the last point is just the social norms. Can we improve the perception of farmers, which will provide the incentive and the improve the willingness of farmers to get involved in BGIs and BGINs because they're welcomed by the community. They can carry their head with pride, knowing that they're contributing in, that they can put things on social media and get lots of positivity and be accepted, be rewarded. So those are different aspects which will come from the survey. As I say, it's very much hot off the press. So much data is in there. Sorry?
We need to cut, Diane. We need to...
That's it. That's fine. Thank you.
Javi. Thanks, Diane, for your talk. We're going to move into the next speaker, who is Joanna Veil-Vengamont from Amur University of Brest. And she's going to talk us about the roadmap for the evaluation of the participatory processes. So, Joanna, whenever you are ready.
I am ready. You can hear me? So,
yeah, all good.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your patience with all the technical problems, and I hope it will work well now. My name is Joanna Veil-Vengamont from the University of Brest, and I will now present to you a roadmap for participatory assessment. This work was done in collaboration with Denis Bailly, Claire Fustek, Manuel Philippe, Alix Levin, and Dominique Bureau. According to the European Commission, stakeholder participation will be crucial to the success of green and blue infrastructures and as a tool that spans several scientific and political disciplines. Green and blue infrastructure policy will require creative methods to inform its planning, implementation, and evaluation. Capitalizing on the experience of different European projects, we developed within the ALICE project a methodology to promote the engagement of management and science in collaborative assessment. We devised a methodological handbook. If you are a manager, national, regional, or local level, in charge of landscape management, a scientist, or any citizen involved in the management of social ecosystem, this handbook provides you with a framework for stakeholder engagement in the context of assessments for environmental management. The first part of the handbook gives some keys about participatory assessments. First of all, what do we call a participatory assessment? It is the co-construction between actors and scientists of a shared diagnostic and vision of environmental issue, of possible management option and of potential barriers. What it is not is a public consultation where a chosen plan is presented to public opinion, and it goes way beyond appropriation of knowledge. Due to the complexity of the socio-ecological issues, it demands a very high level of transdisciplinarity with the integration of very diverse expertise and knowledge. It is a complex process as it calls on one hand for experience in participation, how to assemble a stakeholder forum, how to organize workshops, how to facilitate, etc. And on the other hand, you need expertise in assessment frameworks and tools, in modeling, qualitative or quantitative, in ecosystem services, indicators, visualization, and so on. And you have to mix the two together. To facilitate this process, we propose a step-by-step roadmap. It is organized around 3 phases. The first phase is about brainstorming. So you have to scope the actors' need and identify the team who will run the participatory assessment and their legitimacy. Map the issues in terms of territory stakeholders' governance using a system thinking approach. It will clarify the interaction between the social, economical, and ecological components and the relevant level of complexity to be addressed. This conceptual mapping will take different forms and evolve with knowledge all along the project as the diagnostic is co-constructed with different actors. And finally, share. This first scoping and mapping with stakeholders to develop a common culture on possible BGIN development on a territory. It will verify that the different points of views and perceptions are sufficiently taken into account to make the assessment relevant and start the co-construction of the BGIN strategy diagnosis. The second phase is about planning and selecting assessment tools. At this stage, it is crucial to check up why an assessment is being undertaken. It is an essential but often overlooked stage. The shared exploratory process of the first phase can be very exhilarating in terms of collective energy and open possibilities. However, it can raise unattainable expectancies in the stakeholder forum. This has to be addressed by a clear communication to the stakeholder forum after running a refined triage process. The third phase tends to be the most sensitive part of keeping up the stakeholder engagement, the moment when tools and models come into play. In this part of the doing, management and science tend to part ways. At each step of designing scenarios, gathering economic and environmental data, and building models, you have to keep a high level of stakeholder engagement. And it is not easy, but crucial for the assessment to be participatory. An important part is choosing relevant indicators and visualization of the final result. And do not forget to celebrate. In a final workshop, it is important to sum up the engagement that took place and open the question, where do we go from here? And if the forum wants to run a new process. And remember, these are just guidelines and tools. Every situation is specific. Keep an open mind to all possibilities and adapt to your case. So then, in this third part, we describe how this participatory assessment process was applied in the 4 ALICE case studies. It has to be noted here that the local situation regarding collaborative and participatory management can be highly different from one case to the other, depending on national or local governance, or on the environmental issues that are chosen to be addressed by BGIN strategies. For example, Portugal and Spain were in a very early process of implementing BGIN strategies compared to France, where environmental managers and planners had already integrated it in their objectives. In Ireland, an environmental manager told us that they were asked to integrate participatory processes in their tasks, and it was quite uncomfortable for them because of their regulatory role on the territory and lack of expertise in stakeholder engagement. So the engagement process in the ALICE case studies was structured around 3 stakeholder workshops. I will not detail it here as it will be presented later by the case study leaders. So in practice, the 3 French, Spain and Ireland, and the Paiva River in Portugal. And congratulations to all case studies that had to run stakeholder engagement processes with COVID constraints. The Paiva River team did an amazing online workshop last week, managing to get all the stakeholders to actively participate using all sorts of online brainstorming tools. All along the ALICE project, we ran a monitoring of the engagement process with questionnaires at the end of the workshop and also more than 20 interviews of scientists and stakeholders across the 4 case studies. And this material is integrated in the handbook. In the 4th path, we presented a number of lessons learned during all these participative experiments. They are organized around when management and science team together, discussion and deliberation forums, share knowledge, co-construct the assessment. I will share here just a number of those lessons learned. First, the importance of participatory identification of environmental issues and assessment objective. Sometimes science thinks that they know what the issues are on a territory, and I realize that they're not the same as the stakeholder involved on the territory. So this is very important. The phasing, importance of not missing an important phase and of keeping the energy level of the engagement, even if you don't go through all the steps. And sometimes keep in mind that the energy level can go down between phases. You know, you have the brainstorming, it's very exciting, and then you have to go into the triage or into the doing, and you have to input more energy in the system. Triage and design, agreeing on what you want and can evaluate and communicate it to the stakeholders. Commitment of actors in the assessment, even if it is complex and time-consuming, take the time for discussion, co-construction, and appropriation. The assessment tools. Research must be careful not to want to explain all the complexity with one model or impose scientific perspective constrained by existing knowledge or available numerical models. And a participatory assessment can be indicators and visualization and use all. And mainly a flexible approach, mixing techniques, adapting to the receptivity of the stakeholders, assessing legitimacy upstream. In one of the interview, it was one of the ALICE case study leaders told us, we asked this person, would you say the stakeholder engagement in the ALICE project has changed the way you work? The answer was, now I cannot imagine a next project without it. All the material, the handbook and all the material from implement different participative assessment experiments. Thank you all.